Thank you so much. I actually, my name is Bill King, for those of you who don't know. The short, stubby guy from Cirrus. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, I retired 3 years ago from Cirrus Aircraft, and it has been my great joy to have been a member of COPA, dues-paying COPA member since 2000 or whatever it was, 3 or 4. And I just love this organization, have a passion for it, and those of you who know me know that's true. I do have one administrative comment that I need to make right now, if I can. So please keep this in mind. We have an important message that you need to hear. For those of you in particular who are pilots that flew in, we have some information on your departure procedure, and it got quite quick. Start talking about departure procedures, every pilot in the room gets, so we get their attention. Anyway, we'll have that information for you shortly, and that'll be, TJ's going to share that with us. But I get the great pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker tonight, Dale Klapmeir, and I will, before I do that, I want to just take a minute and I want to share a quick story, if you'll indulge me, about Dale. The day that I met Dale for the first time over 30 years ago. In 1992, I took a trip down to Baraboo, Wisconsin, which is where Cirrus was located at the time. At the time, they were very moderately successful, arguably at best. Kit aircraft manufacturer in Baraboo, and that's where the company started back in 1980, in the mid-1980s, and introduced their kit in 1987. But I went down there in 1992. A mutual friend said, "You got to meet these two guys down in Baraboo." So I flew down with him down to Baraboo, Wisconsin, landed at the airport, went upstairs to their offices in a very modest hangar, and spent a few hours talking with the Klapmeir brothers, and Dale in particular, about their vision for what they wanted to do and their vision for general aviation, which I had absolutely no idea about at the time, to be perfectly candid. But we sat there and talked for a long time, and I heard the story of what they wanted to do and their vision and their dream for the future of general aviation and what it could mean to the general aviation community. And I sat there just really mesmerized as these two guys were talking about the future of general aviation, how it was right now, which I was impressed by in general, but they talked about how good it could be and their vision for the future. And then towards the end of the meeting, they stood up and said, "Well, we'd like to show you something, Bill." And they brought me into their conference room. You all know what plotter paper is, right? It just goes on forever. It's a roll of paper that you put through a computer printer. And these guys had really a very large conference table. On top of the conference table, picture this with me, a piece of plotter paper with pictures of airplanes like this on the paper. And they brought me into the room, and this paper's laid out, and they said, "This is what we think general aviation in the future of general aviation is going to look like." And I looked at that paper, and I was blown away as I looked at this. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I looked at Dale and I said, "Dale, do you have a scissor?" And he said, "Scissor?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you need a scissor for?" I said, "I need a scissor because I want to cut this page right here. Throw this stuff away and start with this stuff. This looks like it came out of a Spielberg movie." And he sat there with his brother Alan, and they looked at me and shook their head and snickered and said, "Bill, you don't have a clue." They couldn't have been more correct. I said, "You don't have a clue. You don't understand. Bill, the technology doesn't exist to build any of these airplanes. Forget about those. It doesn't exist for those. For us to build the future of general aviation and build any of these airplanes, any of them, we're the guys that have to develop the technology behind the things that are going to be required to bring any of these airplanes to market. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist today." And I realized, holy cow, this is incredible. And I looked at that. And way off on the left of this piece of paper was a designation of an airplane that was SP-4. That stood for single piston, 4-passenger airplane. That airplane is the SR-20. Somewhere around the middle of that page is something that was a single jet. Anybody paying attention? Can you imagine what that looked like? I can't tell you. No kidding. That was the discussion we had in 1992. Anybody good at math? So I joined the company, and it was the most incredible 30 years you could possibly have imagined. But Dale's our guest speaker tonight, and I do have his bio here. So if you'll bear with me for just a minute, I'd like to, his official bio, sorry. So let me see here. Dale was born in Rockford, Illinois, to Larry and Carol Klapmeir. Let's see, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that doesn't matter. Built model airplanes as a young kid with his two brothers. He soloed and learned to fly before he learned to drive. Yeah, that's not even right. And then built a kit called the Glass Air. Let's see. Went to Stevens Point and graduated from Stevens Point, a degree in finance and let's see here. And that's where he met Patty. Good move, by the way. Those of you who know Patty. One of his best moves, let's see here, blah, blah, blah. 1987, they introduced the kid. The rest of the stuff's really not all that important. But with that, if I may, I want to introduce my friend, and no kidding, the guy who is behind, or at least one of the guys behind, bringing the technology that brought our airplanes that we love and love to fly, and we wouldn't be here without. The guy behind that brain trust, and our guest speaker and my friend, Dale Klapmeir. Before we bring him up, I'd like to have us play a short video that lays this out a little better than I do.
There was certainly an atmosphere of, yes, we were on to something. Change how people look at aviation. Expand aviation beyond what it is. It doesn't have to be this macho thing that you brag about at a party. It should be common.
Well, parachutes work for people. Why not planes?
Our desire, our drive is every airplane is better than the last.
The 2017 Robert J. Carter Trophy is awarded to Cirrus Aircraft for designing, certifying, and entering into service the Vision Jet.
And it's the accomplishments of all the people before us that inspire the next generation, the next people that will be standing up here receiving this award for years to come.
Emergency auto land activated.
It's not just about the airplane. It's about everything that we do with an airplane. We've made aviation simple, easy, accessible to expand your horizons well beyond where you can get to in a car or where you can get to by the airplanes. You know, one of our goals was to change aviation. We did.
Ladies and gentlemen, to the stage, Mr. Dale Klapmeir, co-founder of Cirrus Aircraft, and my friend. Woo!
I'm saying, you know, that's really good stuff he threw on the ground here. Thank you very much for having me. Is there a clicker up here that, Bill? there it is. There we go. Yeah. I do have a presentation here that I'm going to share with you guys. The first thing is I'm not here to sell you a new airplane, but thank you very much for being our customers, because that's all that really matters to us. We wanted to build airplanes, but we wanted to share what we were doing. So thank you for being a customer. Do I have to point this someplace? Oh, I was expecting to see it down here, so I just skipped something, huh? Okay. Yeah, a few technical difficulties here with me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we got started, what Alan and I were doing at the time, what we were thinking, and, a couple of kids playing around with airplanes. And I'm going to kind of try and keep it to the first decade or so, that how everything evolved with us. So yeah, this is our Cessna 140. So what I started to fly in, we kept it at a hayfield north of the town that I grew up in, which was DeKalb, Illinois. And I would ride my bike out to the airport or out to this little private strip, which really was just a hayfield, and would take lessons in this airplane. And that was in high school. So when I was still in high school, as what I thought all young kids would do, when we'd go someplace, I'd stop at the airports and look and see if there's any cool things there. And I was in northern Wisconsin with a friend of mine, and we were on a camping trip on the way back. We were stopping at airports. I stopped in this town called Clintonville, Wisconsin, and sitting in the tie down was a champ, sitting there upside down. And what does every kid's think? Oh, this is cool airplane. It's upside down, but it's cool. I could buy this thing, rebuild it. Already had a Cessna 140, so I didn't need two airplanes. So we were gonna rebuild it and sell it before I went to college for my first fortune in aviation. I went to the FBO, asked about this airplane that's sitting upside down. They said, well, it's owned by a couple about a mile down the road. They gave me the address of where they were. I drove down there. So this is in the spring of 1979. Drove to their house, knocked on the door. A woman came to the door and said, I said, well, I believe you own an airplane out at the airport. It's sitting out there. It's sitting there upside down. I'd like to talk to you about, I'd kind of like to buy it. This might be an exaggeration, but this is clearly how I remember it. I think I said something like, I'd like to buy it. And she said, sold. I never met if there was a husband there or not. I mean, this woman sold that airplane right there on the spot. And I had to figure out what to pay for it, and Alan and I were close enough that I knew exactly how much money he had in his bank account, and I knew how much money I had in my bank account. So that's what I offered for the airplane. As I recall, it was about $1,400. So I bought the airplane, or agreed to a price, went home, told Alan that we were buying an airplane. He actually loved the idea. Okay, we're going to go buy this airplane. Now, we had just spent every penny the two of us had. We sent our money off to this person in northern Wisconsin. In the meantime, we're trying to figure out how to tell my parents. And Alan and I came home the day that I think we went down to the bank, sent our money off. We came home. My mom and dad are sitting there in the kitchen. First of all, that's a bad thing when you come home in the afternoon and both parents are there. And then it was, boys, come here, sit down. And literally, I remember looking at Alan going, what'd you do? And he looked at me and goes, I don't know, what'd you do? I don't know, but we're in trouble. So we went in there and it was like, so whatever the name of the banker was called my dad. They were friends. Said, I don't know what your boys are doing, but they just spent or sent every penny they have to somebody in Wisconsin. So I was like, boys, come here, sit down. What's going on? So we proceeded to say, Dad, we just bought a wrecked airplane. And this summer, we're going to rebuild it. And we're going to sell it by the end of the summer before I go to college. And we're going to have all this extra money. And by the way, can we borrow the car and the trailer to go get it? That was the start of our aviation career. So we drove up, took the airplane apart, drove it back to our farm in southern Wisconsin, brought it into the shed there. And 2.5 years later, we finished building the airplane. Now, when I say we spent every single penny we had to buy it, that's true. We didn't have a nickel to our names after that. So we fixed things that we should have replaced and put this airplane back together and got it flying. And although it was flying, it was still probably considered a wrecked airplane. So this is absolute truth. There were a couple of things that were in the airplane every single time we took off. A roll of duct tape because something's going to fall off, and a pack of matches, because Alan and I had an agreement that if we wrecked this airplane, we're going to burn it on the spot because we didn't want anybody to know what we were flying around with. That was the start of our foray into aviation. So that got us, and when I say us, I should probably say got me, because Alan was so into, we're going to build airplanes when we're in high school. And I remember thinking, yeah, I want to fly them, but I don't want to build them. I was a little brother following him around. The champ is what got me saying, okay, Alan, I'm catching on to this. I'm getting to it. So here's a picture of our Glass Air. So Oshkosh 1980 comes along and we decide we're going to start our career in aviation. We're rebuilding a Champ. We got to learn more than this. We're going to go buy a kit plane and build it. Well, again, we took all the money we had. We had $200 between us. We went to Oshkosh and we're actually there to go buy an RV-4. Because that was such a cool airplane, and today we'd probably all be flying around in aluminum airplanes, had we. But on our way to give our $200 deposit to Van Grunsven, we discovered the Glass Air, and instead of Van Grunsven getting it, I gave $200 to Tom Hamilton at Glass Air. And this is a really cool airplane. So after Oshkosh, we go home and proceed to go to my parents and say, we just put a deposit down on a kit plane and we only had $200, but we put a deposit on it. And then, of course, my parents are, yeah, so what's the kit plane cost? Well, it's $7,000. My dad's looking at me and goes, well, math kind of tells me you're like $6,800 short. What are you going to do about that? I was like, well, we're kind of thinking maybe you would give us the money for this. And then, of course, after, every kid listens to the lectures from your parents about, we had to listen to this lecture. And at some point he goes, what do you think we are? A bank? And I remember Alan and I going, well, you're the parents. Of course we think you're the bank. What kid doesn't? So after we got through that, yes, you're the bank. That's what banks do, lend us money. My dad said, well, if you think we're the bank, I'm going to treat you like a client. You have to write a business plan on why they should lend us the money to build a kit plane and how that business plan is going to be good for our education and development. My dad said, he asked for that thinking there's no way they're going to do that. He'll never have to worry about it and all this crazy aviation stuff will be gone. Alan and I wrote a business plan then. And it was about 30 pages long on why it was important for them to lend us money to go build this airplane for our future development. My dad actually said he never read the business plan. He was so shocked that we did it that he lent us the money. So, and actually, my mom says she still has it. I don't want to read it. It's got to be really embarrassing and what we would say in those days. But we proceeded. Then it was about 2 years before we were able to get the kit. By that time, we had flown the Champ. We were flying around with the Champ, and we had the Champ, the 140. We quickly realized that the Champ wasn't really worth selling because it was still a wrecked airplane. So we had them both. We proceeded to, again, borrow the car from my dad and a trailer, drove out to Seattle, Washington, where Stoddard Hamilton is located, and met 5 guys that are building these kit planes. And Tom Hamilton, who designed the airplanes and was really running the company, over the years has become an incredibly close friend. But that we went out there and we were with them for about a week, putting together all the parts into this box that we were going to trailer back home. And I remember thinking, well, these 5 guys, they don't really seem any smarter than we are, and they can do this. Well, maybe we actually can go do this. We could go build kits. I got to tell you, over the years, as I've gotten to know Tom, he's a hell of a lot smarter than we are. But it was that inspiration that said, well, they're doing it and we can do it. So we hauled the kit home. That was 1982, and we start building this airplane back into the shed again at our farm. The whole time now talking about and thinking about what we wanted to do in aviation. This airplane, anybody know what this airplane is? It is not a VK-30. Lear fan. This is Bill Lear's last design. This is a twin engine turboprop running through a gearbox, kind of the Soloy type deal with the prop on the tail. This was, it first flew on December 32nd, 1980, because it had to fly. It was going to be built in England someplace, or I think Ireland actually, and it had to fly before the end of, no, it must have been, yeah, it was 1980. By the end of 1980, it had to fly for the government to give them their next tranche of development money. So it officially, on the side of this poster someplace, it said first flight, December 32nd, because they missed it by the day and they figured that was okay. But this was the coolest airplane in the world. And that's what we were thinking about. Now, here's a couple aviation tycoons, if you ever saw it. Now, I can't say exactly what age we are here, but we started the company. I was 23 years old, so here I'm probably, a very mature senior age of maybe 25. And as you think back to when you were in your early 20s, you could do anything. You could, the way we looked at it, we could fly anything. We could design anything. We could build anything. Complexity is not a challenge. Complexity is cool. The harder it is to fly, that just makes it cooler. And the reason we fly is to be really cool. So we're staring at that Lear fan picture all the time and thinking about what a couple of these tycoons want to do in aviation. And this was our first design, the VK-30. This was a 3,600-pound single engine pusher. This is obviously after it's flying, but before that, it was just literally some drawings that we had of what would make a really cool airplane. Now, this is, again, starting my aviation enthusiasm in the 70s when general aviation was going great guns. 1978 was our biggest year since the post-war years, at about 19,000 general aviation airplanes built. 79 was a couple less than that. 80, it started to drop off. 81, 1982, 1983, each year the industry was cut in half. So we went from 18,000 or 19,000 airplanes in 78, and by the time you got to 1998, it was less than 1,000 airplanes. And Alan and I knew exactly why the industry was declining, because there weren't enough cool airplanes. So we were going to fix aviation with this airplane right there. But again, it's just a couple of us. We had kind of outgrown the shed with the glass air. A little sidebar on this. Up at our farm, we took over the shed with airplane parts. That kicked my dad's car out, so he built an attached garage onto the farmhouse, and he made us promise, one of these promises, that no airplane parts would ever end up in the garage. Well, my folks went on a 2-week vacation. At that time, we were working on the Champ, and we were going to recover the whole Champ in 2 weeks before they got back. And, you need a clean place to cover an airplane, and a brand new garage is the best place to do it. Of course, they came back, and it's full of airplane parts hanging in the garage, and that, again, pissed them off. So my dad said, enough of this. You guys can have the entire barn, but there's going to be no airplane parts in his garage. So we kicked the cows out. We poured a new floor in the basement of the barn, and that was where we started. Now, the barn was, it's like 30 feet wide, 60 feet long, whatever a barn is. And I remember when we got that barn, it was like, we will never need more space than what this barn is. Well, this is where we started building the tools to make our VK30 in the basement of the barn. You can see that it's almost full with just the tools. That's Alan and I. Apparently he knows how to use a mask better than I do. Laying up there. You can kind of tell in the back corner there, the blurry picture, that's the Lear fan hanging on the wall there, inspiring us to build this airplane. But with a kit plane, or with a composite airplane, you start on the outside and you build your way in. So we had the shape that we wanted, and we started building these. This is a picture that lots of people have seen. Yeah, I like the socks and the short shorts. But when we built the plug that we're going to make the tools from, to build airplanes from, after that, we weren't positive that we'd fit inside. So what's not in this picture is Alan is just to the left with me sitting in front of it. So I'm looking over at Alan. I'm saying, do I fit? Did we make it big enough? Do I fit? That was our engineering at the time. After we outgrew the barn, we built the first hangar there on the right, a 50 by 50 hangar. Again, walked into it. Alan, we're nuts. Why did we build such a big hangar? It got filled. We built an 80 by 80 hangar behind that we added on to. So each step took more and more space. Here's us working on the wings. After building the tools for the wings, you build the parts in the wing. So that's me on the left. The guy in the center there, Dennis Schlickow. He is a local pilot. Again, this is the probably mid-'80s here, probably about 1986 at this time. And he was a mechanic at the local truck stop. But he had a little strip on his farm, and he had a 150, and he would fly over on the weekends. And the first few weekends he would fly over, he'd kind of stand around and watch us, and we're working, and he'd talk a little. And then pretty soon he would fly over and start working with us on the weekends. And it was January 1st, 1987. Dennis showed up on January 2nd. I should say it was the 2nd. So the first day of the new year, Dennis shows up, and I said, Dennis, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at work? And he goes, well, I quit my job. I'm like, you quit your job? Well, now what are you going to do? He goes, I'm going to work for you. And I looked at Alan and I go, we have an employee. Now what do we do? And Dennis is still there at Cirrus today. The first employee is still with us. When you, again, another little sidebar, the things that made us successful are the people that we had around us. You know, we had a lot of crazy ideas, and when you look at the VK30, some really crazy ideas. But it was the passion and the drive and this desire, this infectious, drive that they brought to us also. People like Dennis and Paul Johnston and Pat Waddick. Pat came to us, who is now president of innovation and production up in Duluth. He was in college and he came one day and said, I want an internship. Can I work for you guys? And we are all young kids. And Alan's going, well, I'm not sure what you can do. And Pat goes, I'll do anything. And Alan was holding the broom. He says, okay, go get started. He's now. So when I talk a little bit about complexity, look at this instrument panel. This is what we flew back in those days. A lot of round instruments, a lot of gauges. Again, when you're 25 years old, when you look at that, it's like, well, this is really cool. And I think I was probably standing there saying, well, there's some space here. Can we stick another system in? Something else for the pilot to do? Because all of that was, part of that machoism side of things. How complicated could you make it is, almost better. Cleanliness was not one of our virtues. As you can see, looking at our shop as we're building the wing, there's the Champ and the Glass Air in the background as we're trying to put together the first airplane. But there's our first airplane as it came out. It is a cool airplane. And I keep coming back to that term because what we were after is big, fast, comfortable, capable, hard to build, hard to fly, hard to maintain, That's kind of where it ended up. But it was a neat airplane. In those days, we could do anything. Literally, there's Chuck Yeager, Dale Klapmeir. I probably argued Alan was down here. Of course, Alan would say, Chuck Yeager, Alan, Dale, But we were so, we could do anything. And we're getting this airplane, it's about ready to fly. And we're sitting at the kitchen table talking about who gets to fly it first when my mom steps in. And I was like, wait a minute. None of you guys are flying this thing first. You're going to go get a test pilot. I was like, test pilot? What do they have over me? Well, the V on here stands for Viken, Jeff Viken, who was Alan's roommate in college, who was an aeronautical engineer. So that's where three of us, and there's Viken, Klapmeir. Jeff was actually working at NASA Langley at the time. And the test pilot, the lead test pilot for at Langley, was a man who was just retiring. Jim Patton was his name. So Jeff said, well, I'm going to go ask Jim if he'd help us with this. So we talked to Jim. He came up to Baraboo, took a look at this. And when he came, he goes, there's no way I would ever fly a project that I haven't been involved in from the very beginning. But I'll be there. I'll kind of help you, set you up so you can learn a little bit of what the protocols are and maybe how to go about it safely. The second day that he was there, he's looking at the airplane and we're talking about what we want to do in aviation. He's going, this is really cool. I wish I was like 30 years younger and I was part of this. I had to fly it. The third day he goes, I'll fly the airplane. So in 3 days, we got the head of flight test from NASA Langley to fly our airplane. On that first test, we realized the importance of a flight test. pilot. So as you can see from this, I wish I had a picture that had our drive system in. The props on the tail. There's a 6.5 foot long aluminum graphite shaft. Well, actually, it starts with the engine. There's a clutch in there that takes out the torsional resonance. Then there's a 6.5 foot long aluminum shaft. And then at the tail, there's a stub shaft that's 18 inches long that we machined out an aluminum housing, put a shaft in that, had taper roller bearings, press shaft in. The slip ring on the end of that is exactly the same way it works on the front of an engine, which actually we didn't know how it worked. So we took the engine apart, figured out how it worked, copied it on our stub shaft. But being brilliant people like we are, the oil that comes off from that slip ring that runs the prop goes into a reservoir. And what does every single reservoir need? A vent. Well, this reservoir is about, from the angle that it sits there, it's about 4 or 5 inches higher than the engine. And there's the return line that takes the oil back to the oil sump on the engine. And out of this brilliance, we thought we gotta put a vent in this stub housing back there. So we drill a hole in the top of the stub housing, and we're running it on the ground. Everything's working fine. Jim takes off on our first flight. He's got about a 40-minute flight test regime that he's going to go through. He's going to fly out. He's going to do slow handling, get a feel of the airplane before he comes back and tries to land it. Alan and I are in the glass air. We're going to fly chase next to him. So as he takes off, we fly up next to him, and we're climbing out. And it was, Jim, you've got oil coming out the back of the airplane. And I was like, Jim, there is a lot of oil on the back of that airplane. So his first flight was take off, get the pattern altitude, fly back, and land once around the pattern. So before he could tell any airplane, he was now needing to land the airplane. It's not quite what he had planned. We pulled it in. We were down to about 1 quart of oil left in the engine. In all of our brilliance, we actually forgot that when you climb out at a high angle of attack, 11 feet behind the airplane, or through all that, about 7 feet or 8 feet behind the engine, is the stub housing that's supposed to be full of oil, and it's now vented. Well, when that 7 or 8 feet is down much lower than the engine and vented, it wasn't a vent, it was a siphon. And we proceeded to siphon all the oil out of the engine in a flight around the patch. So we proceeded to plug that hole and go try it again. That is actually a picture of, not the first flight, because I don't think we're smart enough to grab a camera out, but a very early flight of the airplane with Jim flying it. Now a couple aviation tycoons. We're going to go to Oshkosh to sell the coolest, biggest, most capable kit plane on the market. We printed up a stack of order forms. We talked about which one of us was going to control the crowds and which one was going to sit at the table signing orders. Why do you laugh? Do you know what came next? You don't know. Maybe we did, and maybe not. So after the show, we went home, and we still had that stack of order forms, every one of them blank. We had a lot of people coming up to the airplane going, wow, that's a cool airplane. And we'd say, well, it's a kit plane. You have to build it. What are you, nuts? I'm not going to build that airplane. So our first foray into designing, building airplanes was a lot on designing, not so much on the building. And I describe our time as a kit manufacturer as we were an unsuccessful kit manufacturer. So we sold a few kits, in the end about 40 of them, which is just enough to keep you staying at it. If you don't sell any, that's great. You throw in the towel, you go do something else. You sell a lot, you're actually successful. We're kind of in that no man's land where we weren't successful building kits, yet we wanted to keep going. We thought we had learned something here. So actually, let me back up on this. So we're building kits now we introduced this in 87. Our last kit that we built, I think, was in 91. So we built about 40, or not about, we built 44 kits through that time. Being a couple of aviation tycoons that knew everything about aviation, and when we started, the second day, I think we were about half as smart. 5, 6, 7 years later, we were starting to think we were pretty dumb when it comes to aviation. But one of the smarter things I did in college, I met, 5'8" blonde. Then on my first date, I said, "Hey, I'm a pilot. You want to go flying?" After she thought that was just a line, a pickup line, I did take her flying the next day in the Champ. She didn't throw up. We're together still to this day. But my education in aviation really started with her. So, we flew around dating. When we got married on our honeymoon, we took the Klapmeir and we flew around the West for 2 weeks, then came back. So as you leave on your honeymoon, we've been married for 24 hours. You're stuck in this airplane. You're cozy together. Oh, it's so nice. It's great. 2 weeks later on the way back, you're thinking, geez, if there was a little bit of space in here, wouldn't that be kind of nice if we weren't actually, touching the whole time? So your ideas really start to change. As an aviation tycoon and second only to Chuck Yeager in flying capabilities, every place we go, I'd want to fly. And when we're dating, that was fine. She'd fly in a lot of junk that we flew. After we're married, and through time, we had a 182, we had the Klapmeir, the VK30, I had a biplane, the 140, the Champ, we had a 310, and we had a car. So when we're going to go someplace, it was like, well, let's fly down and see your parents. We could, let's take the 182. It's not that expensive to fly, and it's easy. No, I don't think. She goes, I don't think I want to fly in that. Okay, well, you and I could go take the Klapmeir again. We get down there really fast, really efficient. No, I don't think I want to fly in that. Well, let's take the 310. Twin engine, big, comfortable, fast, capable, can do anything. No, I don't think I want to fly in that. She'd rather go in the car. Whoa, lights come on. It was like, I've got a problem. If I want to fly and my wife wants to drive, guess what we do? Yeah, drive. So that's when the realization came out that designing and building a really cool airplane that she doesn't want to fly in is not a very good product. And so far, everything that we had, she didn't want to fly in. There was always something. In the 182, it's got the great big, high panel. She can't see out anything other than a perfect day. She would get sick. All airplanes in those days, it's cold in the winter, it's hot in the summer. For you that have been flying less than 25 years, we're looking at instrument panels like that first picture, full of gauges. She would sit in the airplane and look at all of those gauges, look over at me and go, this guy doesn't seem that smart. We're flying across northern Wisconsin to my parents. I'm sure we're lost. We would take off and the airport's right there. And she starts saying, well, where are we? I go, well, we just took off. We're still in Duluth. No, where are we? So she didn't think we were lost. She knew that we were lost. And then she would ask, well, when are we going to get there? Let me tell you, the wrong answer to say, well, if you think I'm lost, why do you think I know when we're going to get there? And that's usually what came out of frustration. So she proceeded to stare at the fuel gauge for the next hour, saying, either we're going to run out of gas or we're going to accidentally come across an airport. Which will it be today? So she'd stare at the fuel gauge, miserable the whole flight. And these are the things that completely changed aviation in our minds. You know, we're arguing about how do we go, you know, the 182 RGs, you know, 160 knot airplane, get there pretty quick. The 310 is 190 knots. Wouldn't that be great? And she's like, you don't get it. I'm thinking 5 hours in a car is better than an hour and 15 minutes in anything you got to fly. And then at one point it came up, you know, she's not comfortable in the 310. It was like, well, how can you not be comfortable in that? It's 2 engines, 6 seats, it's big, it's fast, I got de-ice capability, it can do anything. And that's when it literally one day came out, and she's sitting in the front seat of the 310 like this, and we're talking about why she doesn't think that this is absolutely the greatest experience of her entire life. And she goes, well, I don't think you know how to fly it properly. And I'm like, I mean, there aren't 3 better pilots in the world than me. What are you talking about? And he goes, well, every time we're in this airplane, you pay attention to your engine and your instruments. You don't ever pay attention to my engine and my instruments. Therefore, you're not flying it right. And these are all life-changing experiences. So I proceed to say, well, here's how I do it. You know, I'm paying attention to these instruments, and these here run the engine, so I really don't need these instruments in front of you. And she's looking at me going, I don't buy it. Well, I don't. Those are duplicate. You know, in case the pilot's on the right side, those instruments are there. And she goes, I don't buy it. In aviation, there's no way that they're putting all of these instruments in an airplane if they're not needed. And I'm going, they're not needed. Well, then why are they there? And that's when it hits me. That's a damn good question. Why are they there? So through these experiences, when we realized we weren't making any money selling kit planes, we have, both Alan and I, spouses that don't think that maybe our idea cool equals their idea cool. Simplicity has to be more important. And we all, as pilots, get asked the same questions. Where are we? When are we going to get there? And do we have enough fuel? Pretty simple questions. Simple in today's, not so simple 40 years ago. So when we realized we had failed as a kit manufacturer, what does any smart businessman say? Yeah, we can't build kits. You know what we're going to do? We're going to go take on Cessna. We're going to go certify an airplane. Let's go put them out of business. Which is what we did. We decided we're going to do that, but now we actually realized now we actually thought that we did have the answers, and it was growing up a little. You know, I'm not the king of my house unless my wife tells me I am. We all know this. And I'm not alone. We all have somebody to answer to, whether it's a spouse or it's parents or kids or partners or board of directors or clients or somebody. We are all looking for approval on whatever we purchase. And for me, it just happens to be a 5'8" blonde that has to say yes. So from that point on, everything that we designed, the top goal was Patty had to want to fly. It wasn't good enough for her to say she's willing to fly. The goal was she had to want to fly. And we won't drive out of town today. If we can't get there by air, we're not going. So as we failed as a kit manufacturer, we had to keep our name out. And I don't know if anybody in the room would remember our ad campaign, Mystery of Hangar X. Yeah, Mike does. This we put out, it was a 4-part ad series that came out through the spring of 1994 to say that Cirrus was still around, but we were no longer building kits, but we wanted to keep our name out. And it's a story about in Duluth, Minnesota, there's a secret hangar where nobody can know what's going on, but they're working on something, and every now and then a black limousine pulls up and comes to the door cracks open, you let them in, trying to build this mystery. And throughout the series, at the last picture is a picture of an airplane underneath a tarp, but it has that illusion of probably a VK-30. So people didn't really know what it was. Well, this is actually what that mystery was. This and the SR-20. This is called the ST-50. So when we decided to certify an airplane, we looked at the market and said, there's $1 million hole in the market. It was $390,000, about $400,000 for a Malibu, a Piper Malibu, and 1.35, 1.4 million for a TBM. Nothing in between. That's where the old piston twins were. Those are all gone. So we figured even we could hit $1 million hole in the market. So we decided we were going to build this airplane called the ST-50, single turbine 5-seater. We're very creative in our naming, as you see over the years. Now a couple of failed kit manufacturers coming out with a single engine turboprop. This is what today's Vision Jet is. This is what we wanted. About 300 knot cruise speed, very comfortable 5-seat airplane. The latest technology, computer screen in the middle. And of course, everybody's saying, now, how are a couple of broke, apparently not very smart kids in Minnesota going to build this airplane? We started going to air shows in the early 90s, and at every show we would have people come up and say, wow, the VK-30 is a really cool airplane. And we said, well, to get it, you have to build it. And that's usually like, that's crazy. I don't want to build it. I want to buy it. Well, we started saying, well, to buy it, that means we have to certify it. And to certify it, we're going to need, it's going to cost $3-4 million to certify it. I know, we were very naive. I get it. But we started saying that at air shows. And when you say, it's going to cost several $1 million to certify it, most people just shut up. But we had one person who said, $3-4 million? Okay, let's go do it. Let's go certify it. And it's like, whoa, okay, well, actually, we got to start figuring out what we're talking about. So we took Pat Waddick and Paul Johnston, put them up in our conference room with the FARs, and said, go through the FARs line by line, figure out what it takes to pass, to design, to test, to tool something to pass the FARs. And how much is that going to cost? So they start going through it, creating this checklist, adding up the numbers. Like on day 2, they said, well, $3 or $4 million didn't even close. We're not going to do it for that. You got to be at least $10 million. So we call our friend back. Stefan was his name. Stefan, it's like, Stefan, it's not 3 or 4 million. It's more like 10 million. And he goes, well, okay. Well, then we get 10 million. Let's keep going. And they keep, Paul and Pat kept working and adding up numbers. And then we'd call Stefan back and say, well, it's not going to be 10 million. It's going to be 15 million. And at 15 million, it was like, still, okay, all right, let's keep going. Of course, we're still adding up numbers, and then it's Stefan, it's going to be more like 25 million. That's when he starts to go, oh, okay, well, now we got some issues here. We kept adding up. We ended up at $40 million project to build this airplane. And most normal people would look at us and run. Stefan didn't. He said, okay, let's go get $40 million. Stefan was a Swiss Jew. So he was from Israel, and he was a Swiss resident. So he came up with this great plan of, we're going to fund this program by getting the Israeli government to back it. It's a fantastic program for in Israel because Israel's only 180 miles long or something like that. They certainly don't need a 300-knot airplane to go across that country. So every single product would be export. Perfect economic development. Well, he proceeded to sell that to the government on a 2-to-1 match. So every dollar that we spent, they'd reimburse us by 2, which actually gave us, we had Stefan's 15 million. The government would reimburse that through the process of another 30 million. So in a sense, we had $45 million to go start on this project, which we did. Now it's economic development. This is 1992 when we're working on this. Think back to 1992 Israel. A couple of things were going on. They want to expand the country. So development is either on the West Bank or the East Bank, or up at the north. They're in the process of their war with Lebanon. Syria is always a problem. Where do you think the government would say, we need to build an aircraft manufacturer? Well, it's 3 miles from the Lebanon border in a town called Kiryat Shimona. And there's a little runway there. That's where we're going to build a factory to build airplanes. Literally, the first time I was there, you hear some gunfire a few miles to the north. Builds up a little bit more. After a few minutes, some jets come by. There's a bunch more gunfire. A couple of, maybe 20 minutes later, a group of helicopters go by. There's a whole bunch of gunfire. Now it'll be quiet for 3 or 4 days. And I'm thinking, this is where we're going to build airplanes. This, only the government would think this. 1992, we're staying down in Tel Aviv, and in the evening when you're done, working on this project, it was like, well, what do you want to do tonight? And it's like, well, let's go see where that last Scud missile landed. That was Israel in 1992. We'd drive over and see where the Scud missile blew up a city block. The whole time I'm thinking, we're going to build airplanes here? This seems a little crazy. But we actually got as far as building the plant. We built this airplane and delivered it to them. So the way the contract worked is we actually sold the rights to this design to a company called Cirrus Aviation that then funded the building of this design, and then they were going to certify it. We would ultimately have the rights to sell it, but it was going to be manufactured in Israel. A couple of tough things with this is, first of all, Israel is a pretty tough place to try and build airplanes. Second is we quickly learned that government is not the way you fund development, and certainly not economically fund development. We spent a year convincing the government that we had a process to go through that. Then we would spend some money and then ask for the reimbursement at 2-to-1, so then we could move on to the next stage, which they would then spend months determining if we actually did what we said we did before they'd reimburse it. So consequently, we went through the 15 million in cash like instantly, and then after that it was constant wait to get paid. So it was horribly underfunded, and the delay in funding actually killed the project more than anything. But through this, it gave us the seed to push on and maybe build the airplanes that I really wanted. But we didn't have enough to do everything that we needed, and it would come along. This project started in 1993. This is called the Outrider. So basically, a couple of kids, 24 people in Duluth, Minnesota, are the only people asking about certification and what it takes to certify an airplane in the early 90s. Nothing was being done. So Alliant Tech Systems, which is a spin-off of Honeywell, it's actually the side that builds the bombs, all the smart bombs. When you see a picture of a bomb hitting the bridge, the camera goes all the way down. It's probably an Alliant Tech System smart bomb. They had this idea of we should build tactical UAVs, and this is going to be a frontline airplane. Now, this is a pretty big airplane. And the commander at the front line, this is long before they had the drones of today. This is a real airplane. The commander at the front line is going to have control of this thing. It comes in a trailer behind a Humvee. Our job was to design the structure, build the airframes. Honeywell or Line Tech Systems was going to put in all the electronics. It was going to be auto takeoff, auto land, ground avoidance, fly the program that's put in, taking pictures, come back, automatically land. When we started on this, the parameters were it had to take off in 100 meters, and the size of the airplane, the power that it had, we looked at it and said, well, biplane is not a good short field design. It should have one wing. We'll just let us put one wing on. We'll fold the wings up, something like that. But we can build an airplane that can meet the parameters. It just won't look like this. And that's when we started to learn the infinite wisdom of our government. They said, no, doesn't matter if it actually does what it's supposed to. It has to look like that. And we said, well, wouldn't it be more important if it does what it's supposed to rather than look like that? Nope, because all they saw was the pictures, and that's what everybody wants. Design it like this. So it's like, okay, we'll design it to look like that. Guess what? Didn't take off in the space that it needed. Didn't do any of the things parameter-wise that they had. But this was, in a sense, the very first tactical UAV. And yep, it came out of Duluth, Minnesota. Some of the fun things of this project is it had to come out of a Humvee, get put together with two people, no tools, in less than 5 minutes. So we had the whole thing literally snapped together. You put the wings on, the tail on. Paul Johnston designed a activation system, one single handle on the top in the middle. Throw that handle would engage the complete control system and put all the pins in the wings. So in 5 minutes, you could assemble this thing, and it could go. So this was how we funded the company while we're trying to come up with new airplane designs. Another little sidebar on this and the infinite wisdom of our government. We signed a contract with Line Tech Systems, and we figured out we have to build 45 of these, which we did. We gave them a price on what it costs to do the design work and to build each one of them, which we did. We lived to the contract, and at the end of the contract, the government's going to come in and audit us. So I was like, okay, come in. We did exactly what the contract said. Come in. So they start going through auditing us. And at the time, we're working on this. We're working on the SP4, as it was called, and the ST50. So we have only, in a sense, money going out, not much revenue coming in, other than this contract. When the government got done auditing us, they said, well, this doesn't quite fit, this contract doesn't fit the laws required. Like, okay, well, what does it need to do? By law, they have to pay X percentage of our overhead. And we're going, yeah, but our overhead are all these other programs that have nothing to do with this. Why would you pay for that? Well, that's what the law says. So they proceeded to stroke us a check for over $1 million that they owed us in addition to the contract. And that's when we sat there and said, now I understand the idea of the $400 seat cover or whatever, a toilet seat. Like, yeah, that would be our government. There's another shot of the Outrider, as it was called. But at this time, by then I have 2 kids and a wife who doesn't want to fly in anything that I have. So we start designing this airplane. This is the airplane that I wanted. This is where my passion was. I wanted to be able to fly the family around. I needed something that would answer the questions that I'm always asked. Where are we? When are we going to get there? How much fuel do we have? How do she know that I'm not lost? Something that's comfortable, big enough that you're not shoulder to shoulder. Second day of the honeymoon, you don't want to be shoulder to shoulder anymore. Also, my wife would get airsick. I mean, she wasn't throwing up sick, but she was uncomfortable in an airplane. So again, it was like the way that you stay what makes airplanes more comfortable is if you can see the horizon. So in our early SR-20s, the back seat was high enough, I should say in those days our panels had smaller screens, were low enough that in the back seat you could see the horizon forward. The window on the back, although we like to say that's to see the Cessna that you just passed, is really there to just put light into the cabin. If it's lighter, you feel better. The big windows sitting up high so she doesn't get sick. Put in nice, comfortable seats. And in those days, every place that Alan and I went, we had a tape measure with us. And we measured everything. If we liked the car, we measured everything about that seat. Why was it comfortable? Where's the steering wheel? Where's the instrument panel? How big's the armrest? What's the width? We took down every single thing we could come up with in order to create a cabin that could give you that impression of that size. Now, we're still an airplane, so we're not as wide as a car. And it still has to fly, so it's got to be very light. You know, as you all know from flying SRs, doors are not the easiest thing in the world. You know, it's got to still be light, thin, work. Those were the issues that we had to go through, but we started with the inside working out this time. So our very first designs started around chairs in the middle of our hall. We put 4 chairs together. We had the dimensions that we determined that we needed. And we started, from that saying, how big does this cabin have to be? And then from that, how fast can it go? It wasn't designed to be the fastest thing in the world. I learned that when my wife was saying, I'd rather drive for 5 hours than fly for an hour. Telling her we could go 10 knots faster and save 3 minutes. I'm like, nope, doesn't matter. It's all about the experience being in the airplane that matters. So that design goal is really what changed this industry as we look back. We designed it for something other than the pilot. Selling a slick new airplane to a pilot's pretty easy. Selling a slick new airplane to the pilot's spouse is not often that easy. The avionics that came in at our very first screen that we put in the middle was a computer CRT with an inverter. It weighed about 45 pounds, but it had to answer those 3 questions. It had to be a line, an airplane on the line, a clock that said when we will get to that destination, and a fuel totalizer that said when we get there, we'll still have 23 gallons on. One quick story about that. When we were out trying to find fuel sending units, fuel gauge, how to do that. We had companies coming in and telling us, we've got the most accurate fuel gauge in the world. It'll tell you to 8 ounces, exactly how much is in that tank. And then my answer usually was, yeah, but I don't care how much is in that tank. And they're like, what do you mean you don't care? That's the most important thing in the world. And it's like, no, how much is in the tank isn't the most important thing to me. The most important thing to me is, do I have enough fuel in the tank? Meaning, I don't care if it's 40 gallons or 41 gallons. If I need 43, that's a bad situation. So from that point, it was, just tell me how you're going to tell me what fuel will be on board when I get to the destination. Again, answering those questions. I believe I'm out of time. Thank you for having me here. I'm incredibly proud of the company. I retired 5 years ago. I'm very proud, not almost 6 years ago. I'm proud of what the company has done. I'm proud of what it's still doing. But we tried to go from we are building airplanes to we're a lifestyle. We are building something for people to use. And it's really not about the airplane anymore. Although I'm still a propeller head, I love everything about the airplane. It's about what we in this room do with the airplane. And it took us actually longer to learn that than it took me to realize that if my wife doesn't want to fly, I don't get to fly. But that has been the driver to change our company and turn it into what I believe will be a long-lasting enduring company. So everybody in this room, thank you for your business with Cirrus Aircraft. And thank you for having me here. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Dale. If we can all give him a round of applause, none of us would be in this room without Dale.